The workhorse that won the war. The truth about the American tank that became a global legend. I always look at those top 10 tanks or most powerful tank in history lists with a bit of a grin. It's like comparing a supercar to a semi-truck. Yeah, the supercar is faster, flashier, and more fun to look at. But it's the semi-truck that hauls the economy of entire nations. It goes in any weather. You can fix it with a wrench on the side of the road, and it'll clock a million miles while the supercar is sitting in a heated garage. It's the same with tanks. We often get hooked on the big numbers. The thickest armor, the longest gun, the most fearsome names, the Tiger, the Panther, the IS. But wars, my friends, are won by millions of reliable, easy to operate, easy to fix workhorses. The ones that won't let you down when it matters most. The ones you can build in huge numbers. The ones that become more than just metal. They become a soldier's best friend. And today, I want to tell you the story of one such machine. It's a tank that doesn't always get the starring role in Hollywood blockbusters, but one that, without any exaggeration, brought freedom to half the world. This is the story of the medium tank M4, better known as the Sherman. It's the second most produced tank in history, one that fought longer and in more corners of the globe than any other. This is the story of why real success isn't measured in millimeters of armor, but in the minds of engineers and the power of industry. Not born lucky, but designed like a kit. It often seems like great things are born from a single stroke of genius, like a flash of inspiration. You'd think the engineers just sat down and drafted the perfect machine. With the Sherman, it was different. Its story isn't one of a sudden idea, but of a system. A system that proved smarter than any single genius. As far back as the late 1920s, the American military, specifically the Department of Ordnance, arrived at a brilliantly simple idea. What if we built tanks not from scratch, but like a kit? Develop a good chassis for a light tank. Then let's use it as a base for a medium tank. Similar engines, similar suspension parts, standardized components. Can you imagine how beautiful that is for a mechanic? Learn one vehicle, and you're already halfway to knowing the whole lineup. And they weren't alone in this. The Germans, with their famous interleaved road wheels designed by engineer Heinrich Niepkamp, were trying to do the same thing. But here's the kicker. In America, the Department of Ordnance was in charge. It gave the orders, and industry followed. It was a clear, top-down system. In Germany, it was a real battle of the titans. Daimler-Benz, Krupp, Rheinmetall, each had its own engineers, its own ambitions, and its own back-channel connections high up in the Nazi Party. They competed more with each other than they worked toward a common goal. As a result, German tanks were like puzzles made from pieces of different boxes, complex, expensive, with parts you couldn't swap between them. The Americans, however, stuck to their path. First came the light tank M2, then based on it, the medium tank M2. Not perfect, not masterpieces, but platforms. A foundation. And this foundation proved to be surprisingly strong and resilient. It gave birth to the awkward but mass-produced M3 Lee/Grant. And then, in September of 1941, when the world was already in flames, a prototype named the T6 underwent trials. It became the very hero of our story, the medium tank M4. Tall and awkward. Let's break that down. The first thing people always criticize about the Sherman is its height. Like a barn, a big target, the critics say. And yes, compared to something like the T-34, the Sherman was indeed a bit tall. But let's ask a simple question. Why? Everything's simple, and genius has a reason. The tank's layout was dictated by two things: a radial aircraft engine, the Continental R975 with air cooling, big and round like a barrel, and a front-mounted transmission. Designing a low-profile hull with that setup back in those days was nearly impossible. This isn't like today with computer modeling. But this also hid a huge advantage. That height wasn't just for nothing. It provided an incredibly spacious and, pay attention, comfortable fighting compartment. The crew didn't feel crammed into an iron can. They had room to move, to sleep, to not lose their minds after a multi-hour march. A tired, cramped crew is low combat effectiveness. A relatively fresh and rested one is victory. The Americans thought about the people inside, and that believe me, is no less important than armor thickness. And while we're talking about height, let's remember the vaunted German Panther. Well, the designers of the Panther quietly look the other way when you start comparing its height to the Sherman's. The difference is only a matter of centimeters. But you don't hear people shouting about that on every corner. Another common complaint was the removable transmission block in the front of the hull. Yes, in theory, this weakened the front profile, but this was the trade-off for incredible repairability. Imagine a battlefield. On a Tiger or Panther, to get to the transmission, you have to take half the tank apart, remove the turret. It's hours, if not days, of work for a whole repair crew with a crane. But on a Sherman, the crew or mechanics just unscrewed a few bolts. The old block was lifted out, and a new one was slotted in. It took hours. The tank was back in action almost right before your eyes. War isn't a one-on-one duel. It's a conveyor belt. And the side that fixes its gear faster wins in the end. The genius details you don't see. Now let's look inside. This is where the real magic starts. A turret with a future. From the very beginning, the engineers built into the Sherman something most of its contemporaries lacked: room for the future. The diameter of the turret ring, that ring the turret spins on, was an incredible 1,750 millimeters. For comparison, the fearsome Panther's was only 1,650. What does that mean? It means you could fit much more powerful guns into the Sherman's turret. And this isn't just theory. After the war, the French, who got their hands on a lot of Shermans, managed to fit a long-barreled 105mm gun into its turret. The result was the M51 tank, which fought successfully in the Middle East in the 1960s. Can you imagine? A World War II-era tank was a formidable force 20 years later. Try fitting anything more serious than its standard gun into a Panther or a T-34 from 41. They'd laugh you out of the room. The Sherman? It allowed it. A chameleon hull. The Sherman's power plant is a story in itself. American industry understood that relying on a single engine type could create a bottleneck. So what did they do? They created a hull that, with minimal changes, could accept different engines. M4 and M401. Gasoline Continental R975, radial, aircraft style. M402, diesel twin General Motors engine. These went mostly to the USSR and UK via Lend-Lease. M403, gasoline Ford GAA engine, considered the best for the tank. M404, gasoline Chrysler A57 multibank engine, made from 5-car engines strapped together to work on a single shaft. Can you imagine? No other country in the world could afford such luxury to swap out a tank's power plant like a pair of gloves, depending on what was available in the factories. That's genius-level flexibility. Suspension that defied the years. Now, let's look underneath. The VVSS suspension, vertical volute spring suspension. 3 pairs of road wheels, grouped into 2 bogies. It seems simple enough, but its brilliance is in the mounting. It was bolted onto the hull. That seems like a small thing? Oh, but it's not. This allowed for deep modernization without having to redesign the entire tank. The best example was the HVSS suspension, horizontal volute spring suspension, introduced on the M438 model, the Easy 8. Wider tracks, stronger springs. The load limit on the chassis increased by a whole 7 tons. And the most amazing thing, you could perform this upgrade even on the very first Shermans built in 1942. The Germans couldn't do this with their Panzer IV. Its chassis ran out of potential while the Shermans lived on and evolved. The economic miracle. How America became the arsenal of democracy. Now, let's step away from the steel and talk about money and production. Because without this, the Sherman story is incomplete. War is always a question of economics. Who can produce more shells, more bullets, more tanks? Here, the Sherman was a total triumph of American industry. Its production was spread across 11 plants, 10 in the US and 1 in Canada. And these weren't specialized tank giants like in the USSR or Germany. These were automobile giants, Ford, Chrysler, steel companies, and locomotive factories. Imagine, a factory that was building freight cars or cars yesterday is, with minimal retooling, stamping out tanks today. This was only possible because of that kit concept. The simplicity and manufacturability of the Sherman's design allowed it to be assembled on a production line, just like a truck. Numbers that speak for themselves. From February of 1942 to July of 1945, American industry churned out about 49,000 Sherman tanks. That's almost as many as the total number of T-34 and T-34-85s built during the entire war. It's a phenomenal output. And these tanks didn't just go to the American Army. They were sent to allies via the Lend-Lease program. And here's a key point that's often forgotten. The USSR received 4,065 Shermans. An impressive number. But you know who got the most? Great Britain. The British received 17,181 tanks. And by the way, the name Sherman itself is the British designation, named after the American Civil War General William T. Sherman. For the British, the Sherman was the most numerous tank from 1943 to 45. So, who was more dependent on whom? It's a rhetorical question. Combat service, from sandstorms to jungles. The Sherman fought through the entire war. It landed in Africa, Sicily, and Italy. It burned in Normandy and triumphantly entered Paris. It stormed into Cologne and met up with Soviet troops on the Elbe. But its war didn't end in May of 45. The Sherman became the true AK-47 of tanks. Its combat service continued. The Korean War, 1950. 1953, it was the M438, not the newer M26 Pershing or M46 Patton, that formed the backbone of American tank units at the start of the conflict. They successfully battled North Korean T-34-85s. Arab-Israeli conflicts, Israel, having procured its first Shermans, often through shady deals, created a whole range of vehicles based on them. From a Sherman with a French gun to the aforementioned M51 with its 105mm cannon. These tanks fought in the 50s, 60s, and even in the Yom Kippur War of 73. War in South Asia. Shermans were used by both India and Pakistan in their conflicts. Latin America. Some countries, like Paraguay, only retired their last Shermans in the early 2000s. Can you imagine? A tank designed in 1941 served in various armies around the world for over 60 years. Is that not the ultimate measure of success? The unsung hero and unfair comparisons. So why does the Sherman remain in the shadow of the Tiger and Panther? It's simple. Our culture loves myths about invulnerable lone heroes. The Tiger is exactly that kind of myth. Huge, fearsome, with a gun that could punch through anything. But only 1,347 of those were ever built. There are almost 50,000 Shermans. American and British tactics were different. They didn't charge head-on, hoping their armor was invincible. Their tactics were built on combined arms: infantry, artillery, air power, and tanks. The Sherman was a part of that system. Yes, one-on-one against the Tiger, it was at a disadvantage. But the surviving Tiger crews in their memoirs don't talk about duels. They talk about constant, grinding fire from all sides. They were overwhelmed by mass, by artillery, by aircraft. And the Sherman was the perfect tank for that kind of war. It's often compared to the T-34. And that's fair. Both were workhorses. Both were simple, utilitarian, and mass-produced. Both were winners. But the Sherman had one key advantage: quality of manufacture and crew comfort. The Soviet T-34 was austere and harsh, like the war on the Eastern Front itself. The Sherman was more civilized. A gun stabilizer that allowed for accurate firing on the move, powerful radios in every tank, not just the commanders, a spacious interior. All of this increased long-term combat effectiveness. The lesson we've forgotten: the medium tank M4 Sherman is more than a tank. It's a philosophy that says the perfect tool isn't the one that shines on the parade ground, but the one that doesn't fail in the mud and in battle. The one you can fix with a sledgehammer and a wrench. The one that's made so an average person can use it, not Superman. When, on February 14th, 1957, the Sherman was officially retired from U.S. Army service, its intended replacements, the M26 Pershing and M46 Patton, were retired alongside it. Ironic? No. Inevitable. The Workhorse had outlived the machines meant to replace it. So next time you're watching a World War II movie and you see that modest, tall Sherman, don't laugh at it. Remember this story. Remember that real strength isn't in a single record-breaking feat, but in reliability, in numbers, in smart organization, and in caring for the person inside. That's what wins a real big war. All right, folks, that's the end of our massive deep dive into one of the most underrated heroes of World War II. I hope I managed to show you the Sherman in a new light, not as a burning tin can from bad movies, but as a triumph of engineering and industrial power. Now it's your turn. I'm waiting for your comments down below. Do you agree with my take? Maybe you have your own? What tank do you think truly deserves the title of the best and why? Let's debate it. I love a good discussion. And of course, if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. There are plenty more stories coming about great and forgotten weapons, brilliant engineers, and the secrets of military history. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end.